It is my pleasure to have Dr. Andrew Owens here with us, and he's going to tell us about his new book, Desire After Dark. So, Andy, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me so much. So currently I am a lecturer in the Department of Cinematic Arts at the University of Iowa. My research and teaching interests focus mainly around things like media historiography, global film and television history, critical race, gender, and queer theory, media industry studies. I also am very big into genre studies. Horror is sort of my main bag, as you might be able to guess from my book. So those are very briefly some of the things that I'm interested in both the classroom and also in my research.
Yeah, well, those topics are of huge interest to me too. So I'm very excited to read your book, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about it. So the audience can understand better, though. What is your book about in a nutshell? I know that's a broad question, and you cover a lot of topics, but if you had to elevator pitch it, what's your book about?
Basically, the book is about why, since around the 1960s, I start in the year 1960, why is it that queer audiences in particular, and sort of as that term has evolved, throughout the years, that obviously in the 60s was very much a term sort of under fire, right? It was pejorative, but people were still thinking about the possibilities of recouping that, and that would certainly come to the fore in the late 80s. But it's really why historically have queer people gravitated towards the horror genre. That why do queer people find not only entertainment in the horror genre, but they find sort of places to connect personally, particularly through their own coming out processes, it coming out as either being gay or lesbian or trans or queer or bi or anything like that, that historically people have really gravitated towards this genre to sort of help them with that and to see kind of similarity between their own lot, what they feel as, as queer people, we often feel that we are outcasts in some way, at least in the beginning when we start about thinking about that process. And the horror genre certainly is obviously about otherness as well, sort of at its core, right? At least in the two figures that I examine most closely in the book, which are the witch and the vampire. And so historically, those figures are wrapped in discourses of otherness, of vulgarity, of not being normal, quote unquote, which is very akin to how a lot of queer people sort of feel themselves, at least initially, when they're starting to think maybe I'm not like other people. Right? And so the book takes that as its sort of central conceit and looks for about the past 60 years at several moments where that seems to be really at issue in Anglo-American media across both film and television.
I know you did a ton of research for this and put a lot of work into it. So, for someone who may not know much about this topic or maybe is wanting to learn more, who is this book for, and maybe who is it not for?
I think, as an academic monograph, the primary audience is my colleagues who are also academic researchers and who hopefully will teach my book and engage with it. But it really is my hope that this book reaches a wider audience, that this book has been a real labor of love for me. The people ask me, oh, when did the book start? Well, depending on when you I have a lot of different answers to that question, depending on how specific you want to get. But if we take it as this is a heavily revised version of my doctoral dissertation, I've been working on this book for the past 8 years. And so it has been the primary focus of my research for the past 8 years. And it really has been a labor of love in that way. And I want it to reach as broad an audience as it can. And so I think it's for certainly academics, but it's for people too, I think, who have an interest in the occult, like I did as a young kid. And that's, again, why I say this is sort of a labor of love or a passion project. This is something I've always been interested in. It wasn't just that I stumbled on it in my 20s. So I think that it is for people who are interested in learning more about how occultism has changed over the past 60 years in the United States, in Britain, right? And people who are interested in maybe how to think or learn a little bit more about, how to think critically about media, right? About how maybe we all, you know, are bombarded with so much media every day that we don't realize that the media we consume, right, really has the potential to shape who we are and who we become and the way that we think about our relation to the world, right? And so I think it could potentially, and I hope, will be for people like that, um, who are interested in how what we consume ultimately kind of gives us a template for who we become.
You kind of answered my next question, but if you could elaborate more on that, more specifically to the scholar readers, what do you hope that this book will teach them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, I hope the book um, makes an intervention in two main ways, I would say. I hope that one of the things that I'm very adamant about in the book is following on other scholars who have come before me and probably said it much more eloquently than I have in the book, is that there was a political necessity or imperative, certainly in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, in terms of the media that we consume, particularly television, to see quote unquote positive representations, right, of LGBTQ people. And so organizations like GLAAD, for instance, publish a yearly report called Where We Are on TV, right, that count the number of queer characters that are on TV every year. And so the assumption being that positive representation will ultimately lead to progressive political change, right? Or at least that's the hope, right? And I want to just push back on that notion a little bit or complicate it, right? To remind, I would say, not to tell people because I think they know it, but to remind people that, life isn't like that all the time, right? And that a lot of these texts that I deal with are about, queer people who are painted as villains, right? Some of them sympathetic, some of them not, right? And I think in a way I want to remind people that queerness, at least as some queer theorists have put it, and what I take to heart very seriously, is a lot about, as Richard Dyer puts it, sort of outlawry, about living on the edge, about sort of reveling in your otherness in some ways. So that what Lisa Dugan calls homonormativity, the push to be, a gay person, but to assimilate sort of into straight culture, right, is something that this book really resists. Right? And that reminds people sort of where they came from, and of their history, excuse me, in that sort of anti-assimilationist, I would say, vein, right, of sexuality, which in a lot of ways can be thrilling and agentive and exciting, and don't have to conform to the dictates of the straight world. So that's one thing that I hope the book can contribute. The other thing is that I really do want to take seriously, and I want readers to take seriously, the fact that there are people in the world that witchcraft is a real religion and has been recognized as such in the United States since the 1970s. Right? And so I want people to take that seriously. I want people to not think, oh, people who believe in witches and the supernatural, like they called, are just crazy crackpots or whatever, or that the entertainment industry is simply exploiting this for dollars, which of course they are because the entertainment industry does that best. Right? But at the same time, these are people who take this very, very seriously, right? And who you can talk to people time and time and time again who will tell you very eloquently about their relationship between, say, being a witch or being some sort of esoteric or occult practitioner and their sexuality. There is a real life link there, right? And even though that has been sort of filtered and fictionalized through the media that we consume, I want people to take that seriously. And I want people to respect the fact that that is a real phenomenon in the world.
Oh, for sure. You touched a lot on what was going to be my next question, which was how will this book be important for those subcultures, whether it's queer subcultures, occult subcultures? It sounds like pretty spot on all the things you said, but anything else you can add to that?
I think, I hope, I'm one small person and this is one book, but I hope that there is, I do believe very strongly in the power of seenness in media. When you feel seen by a particular television show or a particular movie, or even by a book by a particular author who, does describe exactly what you've been feeling, but you've never really been able to perhaps articulate it yourself, right? And that this person sort of says it, and you're like, yes, that is exactly it. Right? And I've encountered that before. I know a lot of people who have encountered that, in other parts of their lives. And I hope that is something that I'm able to do for some people, to again, to take that seenness seriously and to say, yeah, I want to, as much as there is still, in 2020, a lot of misunderstanding, perhaps, and a lot of cliche and a lot of ridicule, perhaps, even around, say, occult subcultures like being a vampire or being a witch. I want to tell those stories in some ways. And part of me, if I had to do the book over again, I would try to, if I could, to make it more ethnographic. I would try to include interviews with people, though being an academic, that's really hard because of something you have to go through called IRB, which is about using human subjects for research. But that's something that I really hope I can do in the future, right? If I continue in this line of research, which I hope I do, is to assure those people that I'm an advocate and that I am someone who wants to tell their stories the truest way that I can.
There's always a next book, right?
And a next book and a next book.
Yeah, yep. Well, we're kind of going off of that topic into production and news stories. How do you feel or hope that this more awareness of this topic and these influences, as we think of them more critically, are going to affect productions in the future?
I think that the horror genre, is here to stay. And one of the things that I hope my book contributes to, not only academics being reminded of, but maybe in a popular press setting or audience, is that genres are cyclical. Meaning that genres sort of come back around historically and over time for certain reasons. It doesn't just happen, in a vacuum, or it doesn't just happen capriciously. That there are certain reasons why certain genres appear at certain times. I think lately a lot of, this has maybe been for the past 10 years, I would say, a lot of sort of YA or teen television has been very interested in horror, specifically in the kind of occult horror that I've been researching, vampires, witches, that kind of thing. The CW, the TV network, has basically built its brand on that, more or less. It kind of rises and falls on that. So if you think about shows like The Vampire Diaries or the originals, Supernatural, certainly, that's been on for God knows how long.
Just ended,
which I believe is coming to a close or just ended. Yeah. So I think there is something really interesting about the fact that that market currently is very much youth targeted, right? Or at least teen, young adult targeted. That's something that certainly was a big part of the discourse of why Twilight was so successful, right? And sort of it hit a nerve, or it hit a niche when Twilight came out. And it's the same thing, I think, with these other shows that have appeared on television that are really giving not only just young folks and teens in general, or even people in their 20s and later, but particularly people who are dealing with the notion of possibly coming out or recognizing that they are not straight or fall somewhere on the LGBTQ spectrum. Again, that sort of template of otherness, right? That seenness of that sometimes it's okay to be an other, and that there are sort of pleasures that go along with that. And there are communities and subcultures that are formed around those identities that don't have to be all about, um, shame or disgust or being a loner.
For the film trivia lovers, do you have a favorite fun fact in the book that maybe you want to share? Kind of give viewers a taste of what's in these pages.
Yeah, I think it's not about a film, it's about a TV show, actually. That the first chapter of the book, I talk about a show that premiered in 1966 called Dark Shadows, which was on ABC. It was America's first gothic supernatural soap opera. Right? It became very famous. And so one of the joys of being a researcher in a lot of ways is, we as academics sort of we read critically, we read analytically, and we make arguments based upon the evidence that we see. Right? And sometimes it's nice to have a smoking gun where the people you are talking about also admit the thing that you're saying, right? Makes you feel validated because you're like, ha, I was right. Right? So anyway, long story short, when I went to UCLA to do some research, the showrunner of Dark Shadows, Dan Curtis, his papers are at UCLA. And I went there and I went into special collections and I looked at his papers and I was sifting through stuff and I found this memo from one of the script censors at ABC. So during the network era, 60s, 70s, 50s, all scripts had to be approved by a network censor, right? That had to read it and it had to be approved. And so this woman went through this one script and it was attached, and the memo said, page blah, 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 paragraph 2, please make sure that the references to light housekeeping, and woman of the house do not insinuate any sexual relationship between these two men. Right? And when I saw that, I almost fell out of my chair. Because I was like, see, I'm not just making it up. They knew about it. They knew. So that was fun for me, as a researcher, getting that one smoking gun that I was just like, I'm not just talking out of my ass. They knew it.
Oh, that's fun. That show, Tim Burton made that into a movie a few years ago.
Yeah, don't bother with them.
Here's a fun question. Who do you think is the biggest horror or queer icon? Do you think maybe not necessarily who you discuss, but someone who's the biggest icon? Basically?
Oh God.
Mine's Elvira, at least in America, because I think it depends also where you are. But to me, Elvira, I think she's the mistress of the dark. Even though she's not on TV anymore.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Elvira has such a huge following. Still, I mean, and the longevity of her career is really kind of amazing. And I still think, I'm not sure I would point to one specific person necessarily, but I still do think from my generation of people, and I purposely kind of didn't talk about this in my book because other people have done it at length and in probably, again, ways that are much more articulate than I could have. But I know that myself and people of my generation have such a profound fondness for Buffy. That Buffy still, to this day, that show meant so much to so many people. And I know that sounds corny to say, but, it did for me too. And that I think, that show really, in addition to some other flashpoints, kind of crystallized everything that I'm talking about in the book and really hit the right vein in the late 90s.
Dr. Owens, thank you so much. Where can people pre-order your book?
The book's available wherever your fine retailers are selling books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and also the website of my publisher, Indiana University Press.
Awesome. Anything else you want to say to the audience? Anything you want to close with?
Much love.
Pre-order the book on Amazon. I will share a link. And how can people get in touch with you if they have any questions or if they'd like to reach out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I am on Twitter at AndyOwens85. that is also the same handle for Instagram, right? And you're free to contact me by email. My email address is andrew.j.owens@gmail.com.
I'm really excited to read your book when it comes out March.
March 2nd.
Perfect.
Available for pre-order.
Of course. Yeah, pre-order the book now. Thanks, y'all.